Hello, everybody, and welcome. As you are all aware, West Bengal has been facing severe floods for several decades now, both in the southern parts and in the north. Most recently, just about 2 weeks ago, North Bengal, particularly parts of Jalpaiguri district and the Darjeeling Hills, was devastated by floods and landslides precipitated by heavy rain for about 2 days. Today we're here to speak about how far that damage was actually caused by erroneous discharge of water by the central government as alleged by the Chief Minister of West Bengal, Mamata Banerjee, and how far it is also the state's doing in its failure to curb encroachment and illegal construction. We have with us eminent ecological economist Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, who heads the development studies of the Observer Research Foundation. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you.
Dr. Ghosh, Mamata Banerjee, our Chief Minister, has alleged that this was a man-made flood and that erroneous discharge of water was the main reason behind it. Would you agree?
Well, let me come to this point, the issue of calling a flood man-made. First of all, let us understand scientifically. Floods and droughts are essentially integral components of the broader eco-hydrological cycle. So floods are going to happen and droughts are also going to happen. You cannot avoid them. Neither you can defy or deny them. The issue is that the concern right now is not with the floods but with the flood damages. How are flood damages caused? Flood damages are essentially caused because we come in the way of the river. It's not that the rivers have come in our way. Now, as far as, when we talk about flash floods, when we talk about some other elements, or suppose a sudden release of water from a dam, in case, in fact, early warning systems are not there, the flood damages might increase. You might not anticipate this kind of a deluge coming out of that. So, however, it's very unlikely that a sudden release of water happens without any kind of early warning, especially when a construction is there, and a construction like, say, the Damodar Valley Corporation, which was meant essentially as a multi-purpose project. One purpose was definitely related to flood control. The other purpose was related to hydropower generation as well as thermal power generation. The concern is that whether these structures are actually effective in today's world, given the forces of global warming, climate change, and also the fact that there have been a host of encroachments, embankments being constructed, unplanned urbanization happening. Presently, in fact, these structures are not effective to meet the real world challenges. That is the whole concern. So it's a multiplicity of concerns, a multiplicity of variables that have actually aggravated the flood damages. Now, floods by themselves, as I stated, these are integral components of the broader eco-hydrological cycle. They have their own benefits as well, especially, in fact, if you're concerned with this entire basin, which we call the Ganga-Brahmaputra Meghna system, Meghna basin as such. Now, one big characteristics of floods out here, of the GBN basin or of the Himalayan river system as such, is that they are not merely the liquid flows or water flows. They also have the solid flows called the sediments. And that is why, in fact, in our research, Jayanto Bandyopadhyay and I, we often used to call the Himalayan river system as an equilibrium of webs, water, energy, biodiversity, sediment. So if you construct, suppose, say, a project, get into any kind of structuralist engineering system, to extract hydropower, what you are going to disrupt is the entire flow regime. The sediments are going to drop further upstream, right? And at the same time, on the basis of this presumption that that these are flood control measures and we are not going to have any kind of release or whatever, you keep on having unbridled urbanization, unbridled economic development, urban development further downstream. And in case, suppose, say, the river changes its course, in case, suppose, say, there is some kind of a flash flood, in case there is some kind of a cloudburst, the system by itself has become already unsustainable to govern this kind of a deluge. And that is the whole problem. So it is not really the lack of early warning system. I don't think an early warning system was not there, given that there was a flood control measure. It is a multiplicity of factors which have actually aggravated the flood damages, in fact, in North Bengal or further downstream of the DEs.
Talking about global warming and climate change, let's talk about what precipitated the floods in North Bengal. There was 2 days of very hard rain, unprecedented rain. Now, I recall an earlier conversation with you where you said that it is not possible to determine the kind of rainfall pattern, particularly in the Himalayas. And so in that context, what is the situation that is required for the government to do, given that it cannot control or have any prior warning to such catastrophes?
I think that's a pretty genuine concern that you have raised. One very critical component of this is, one of the factors of the driving process of this flood in the North Bengal has also been, this has been attributed legibly to a certain extent to the water release and the flooding in Kuta. And the storage mechanism or the project that we had, the hydropower system that we had in Bhutan, somehow turned out to be defective. And that is why, in fact, there was excess of water flow towards this site, which resulted, in fact, to the flood or the deluge, in fact, in North Bengal. Now, one very critical component is that we don't have any kind of agreement on data sharing, regular data sharing for early warning systems as far as these river systems are concerned. And that is something that we need. There should have been an early warning system. And how can that mechanism work? Suppose we have an agreement on the Brahmaputra, on the Yarlung-Tsangpo Brahmaputra system with China, right? So especially during the high season or the high flood season, high monsoon, what they do is they share data twice a day from 3 measuring stations, which are located, in fact, on the Himalayan system, right, in Tibet. So in the same way, for Bhutan also, we can essentially wisely choose those stations, so those measuring stations, by way of which we will be in a position to at least forecast that what might be the amount of water coming to India. And in any case, suppose the West Bengal also, whether it's West Bengal or into Sikkim or whatever, depending on the river system. So we definitely need a broader integrated basin level approach. It cannot be a very fragmented approach across 2 different stations, across 2 different states. So, because see, it so happens that in most cases, this approach is missing, in fact, in South Asia. And that's why I stated that, why do we look at floods as disasters? Floods shouldn't have been disasters. Floods are an integral component of the eco-hydrological cycle. Let's face it, why do we have, the floodplains of Bihar or the lower Ganges as such being called the rice bowl of South Asia? This is because of the fact that flood waters, we used to have floods. Traditional knowledge system used to acknowledge this particular floods as something that is bound to happen, inevitable. And eventually they made it to full use. So when the flood water used to recede, it used to reach behind the rich alluvium, right? And that is what enhanced the soil productivity over time. Now, when we created these large embankments, we created these large structures driven by our entire hangover of that British colonial engineering legacy, we actually impeded on the working of the natural ecosystem processes of a river basin. So we converted floods to flood damages. We converted, the ecosystem services of sediments to disservices of floods. We essentially stopped the sediments from flowing to the delta with the construction of the Farakka barrage, which is arresting the sediment further upstream. We essentially arrested all those sediments which were making up The Ganges Delta by itself, Kolkata is part of the delta. It's not part of the active delta, tidally active delta. The tidally active delta is further downstream, which we call the Sundarbans here, right? And the Sundarbans is shrinking. The Ganges Delta is shrinking because of two forces. One force is sea level rise, global warming and climate change causing the sea level rise. The other force happens to be the fact that the sediment which used to flow through the creeks and the canals and the distributaries are not flowing there. That used to resuscitate the lost land. So eventually, the delta is shrinking because of one, the global force of global warming and climate change, and the subnational local force of the Farakka Barrage. So this is a critical condition which we are exposed to at this point in time. So it is floods, it is a multiplicity of factors which have made floods a damage out here, a negative factor out here, and we need to correct courses in some way or the other. But correcting courses is going to entail a huge cost.
But you said something very interesting, which is you talked about a colonial hangover as far as engineering is concerned. Now, did you by that did you imply the numerous hydropower projects that are there in Sikkim and some in West Bengal? And are you saying that these are outdated projects, or they need to be modernized or substituted by anything else?
See, the problem with hydropower in the Himalayas is that we never consider the cost holistically. What is the prime problem? The prime problem is that if you drive across the Teesta, on the banks of the Teesta itself, right from West Bengal to Sikkim, you will find some 29 or 30 hydropower projects. Some of them are working, some of them are non-working and non-functional. Now, what is happening in the process? Especially during dry season, you won't find adequate flow. There are some 24 or 25 or 26 hydropower projects which are planned in Sikkim. Around 4 or 5 of them are in West Bengal, which are functional. But you will find that none of these are essentially run-of-the-river projects, despite being claimed as run-of-the-river projects. By run-of-the-river projects, in the sense, you are simply using the flow to generate hydropower, and that doesn't really alter the flow regime. It doesn't really impede the flow as such. But you will find that there is a storage mechanism, some kind of a pondage, right, at the upstream of those projects. This is precisely because during the dry season, that is the summer months, the river runs dry, the draft is sufficiently low, the flow is not adequate enough to essentially generate that hydropower just by the flow by itself. So, in that case, they essentially store the water and eventually release the water for flow. So, they have to, maybe for hours, they are storing the water. And probably the hydropower is generated barely 5 to 6 hours in that entire day. And this is problematic because, first of all, the river is getting fragmented. I mean, geographers often talk about, or hydrologists also, they often talk about this phenomenon of integration. A river is an integral unit, right? So now this entire fragmentation of river kills the river. So the water is not going downstream maybe for 12 hours in a day or 6 hours in a day. And eventually that results in a complete disruption in the ecosystem structure of the basin. What about the fisheries? What about other species? What are going to happen to those? And in the process, you will find that once, in fact, you reach, say, a space like, say, Gajardoba, in fact, on the Teesta, where a certain amount of water had to be diverted for urban needs, especially for this growing urban centers of Jalpaiguri and Siliguri. The issue is not barely with the urban water consumption out there. On both sides, there are also large patches of dry season paddy that are getting cultivated too. Dry season paddy is essentially a major water guzzler because it's completely irrigated. The same phenomenon prevails in Bangladesh as well. Now, hydropower by itself is not merely the killer of the river system. Hydropower or any form of construction, a storage mechanism, hydropower, whatever you call it, a multi-purpose project, is the hydropower sustainable on the Himalayas? That is also a big question on the Himalayan system as such. First of all, we should not forget the fact that many of these projects are constructed in extremely active seismic prone regions. There are two critical knowledge bases which are missing, in fact, in this entire scheme of things. One thing is related to purely what you call the mechanism of cloudbursts. Why do cloudbursts happen? And how do we predict that cloudbursts are going to happen? This science is still not properly understood in the Himalayan system. That is one. Second is, are we really in a position to predict seismicity? Can we really forecast, say, earthquakes? If earthquakes happen, what is going to be the downstream impact of these barrages? If suppose there is a dam burst. So these are some of the critical questions that remain. So hydropower in the Himalayas, whereas in fact you might be getting extremely attracted and might feel that, well, it's a great thing happening. I mean, there's huge hydropower potential, no doubt about that. But what are the costs? What are the downsides of it? And these costs are never featured in the entire scheme of the cost-benefit analysis of these projects. That is something that we have to take into consideration. And that is where it is not merely the economics of things that will dictate the entire decision making of hydropower. It has to be the holistic ecological economics that has to be inbuilt in the holistic cost benefit analysis, or what we call the integrated cost benefit analysis of hydropower projects. And that is something that is simply not there in the existing discourse. So hydropower projects can be good if, suppose, say, you have considered all the precautions, if you have in some way or the other incorporated all the associated costs, if you have designed it in such a fashion so that the risks are also been considered. However, if you take a much more reductionist engineering approach, then I just want to build a hydropower and it's going to generate electricity in some way or the other, it can be disastrous.
Now, you're talking about 30 hydropower projects along the Teesta. Now, that number is a formidable one and kind of spells disaster by itself. So, are they really? Is it wise to have so many? And is there any other alternative that you can suggest?
Of course, it's not wise to have so many, no doubt about that. Most of those operating in Sikkim are private hydropower projects, or suppose a planned in Sikkim are private projects as such. The question is that how do we essentially maintain the integrity of the river, integrity of the flow regime? We must not forget the fact that the Himalayan system is a very dynamic system. It is not like the peninsular rivers. It is not like, first of all, they are, it's a combination of glacier, snow, and of course precipitation. Rainwater. So at the same time, the huge amount of sediment. They are emerging from regions, in fact, which are seismic prone as well. There is a clear transboundary dimension, which makes the entire problem very complex. So you have, suppose we talk about the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna, this entire system and their tributaries. Altogether, it's shared by multiple nations. You have China, you have Bhutan, you have Nepal, you have Bangladesh. If you consider Indus as part of the Himalayan Hindu Kush system, of course it is part of the Himalayan Hindu Kush system. Then you have Pakistan, Afghanistan also involved in this entire game. So this makes the entire game of rivers a complex problem. And always remember one thing, that if I perturb one part of an integrated ecosystem, it might not reflect itself as a perturbation, in fact, in the immediate vicinity, but might have a reflection, in fact, somewhere else, way downstream. Just as you perturbed the flow regime, you constructed the Farakka barrage, and the impact is getting reflected on the Sundarbans. Right? This happens everywhere. This happens, in fact, when a system is integrated. And this integration or this understanding of this integrated mechanism is somehow missing, has been missing so far in our engineering sides, especially in our reductionist water engineering sides. Because this entire technocracy Let me be a bit maybe a provocative. I can afford to be, I presume.
Please go ahead.
Uh, this entire brick and mortar system, which has been institutionalized in the form of the Central Water Commission, is dominated by engineers largely, or only engineers, not largely. You only have engineers there who look at water merely as a stock of resource that can be stored precisely for human use. But water is not like that. Neither is for short-term human use. If man or human or civilization has to survive, we have to look at water as I stated, as an integral component of the natural eco-hydrological cycle on which life is dependent, on which ecosystem structures are dependent, which is providing certain, which functions in its own organic way and provides the human society with various ecosystem services. And these ecosystem services are the services provided by the natural ecosystem, that is the basin ecosystem, through its own organic functioning. And if we impede on that, then the ecosystem structure gets disrupted. That disrupts the ecosystem function, that disrupts the long-term ecosystem services, like soil formation, in fact, in the delta, like fisheries. Fish catch will decline over time. This happened, in fact. That is why if you look at the global examples, you will find that across European Union and the US, by 2015, around 500, more than 1,000 projects have been decommissioned. That is precisely the no. Don't forget the fact that between 1920s and the 1960s, they were the ones who were talking about dams. US went for from 1920s to the 1960s. I mean, that's considered to be the dam building decades for the United States of America. And today they are the ones, in fact, who have been decommissioning dams. European Union decommissioned dams, in fact, throughout the 1990s, 1980s and 90s. And in certain cases, they found that the fish actually returned on the water, returned on the stream. They have been incentivizing the farm community to keep water in stream through various mechanisms. Now, one of the reasons why, in fact, the desert area dried up farther, in fact, in western US was precisely because of dam construction. So, out here also, we have to get out of this entire mindset that dams been developed. We need structures which are better informed. We have to think about a more integrated social ecosystemic dynamics for designing these structures. We cannot think of structures which are unsustainable, which are going to cause further damages than the benefits. And we the humans are going to bear the cost. Let's face it. You're talking about today in this entire mechanics of global warming and climate change. We should not forget the fact that we are the perpetrators and we are the victims. Conservation is a selfish human need for its own development, for the progress of the civilization. And that is precisely why we cannot only think of growth, we also have to encounter the costs of growth. And the biggest cost of growth that we are encountering at this point in time is climate change.
So, Mamata Banerjee was not really too far from the truth when she said that there is no need for dams anymore, for which she got quite a bit of criticism from her political opponents.
Well, let's face this. Do we don't need dams? Do we need dams or don't we? That's the big question. Do we need the DVC? Out here, let's face this. The bigger question was not with dams in Jimmy. The concern was with DVC, Damodar Valley Corporation. DVC was a structure of the 1940s. Let's not forget that. It's a multi-purpose project. Even today, a certain component of electricity in this part, West Bengal, Jharkhand, especially in fact, in this part of West Bengal is dependent on the DVC, including Hydel and Thawana. Do we have an alternative? That's the big question. We need to create alternatives. We need to create the substitutes. Second is the flood control. DVC was also a structure which was going to help, in fact, in the context of flood control. Is it going to serve the purpose? Well, the entire dynamics, the knowledge system, everything has changed over time. Can the DVC really control flood? If at all there is a very high precipitation in its downstream, it can't. Can the DVC control its flood beyond its capacity? It can't. The mechanism of flooding or the monsoonal precipitation mechanism has changed over time. And this structure has not evolved over time. So you cannot think of a static solution for a dynamic problem. DVC is a static solution, a static structure, which remains as it is. And the problems have, of course, it has evolved over time. So, well, you have to think of a different structure, but that doesn't mean that today we don't need dams. We possibly need dams. Of course, we need dams for many other things. Now, let's face it, hasn't China constructed dams? But China, along with that, also has a sediment separation technology, a practice. How are they doing that? I will next best is that the Yellow River in China is the most sediment-laden river in the world, right? You have constructions of that. Even then, how are they separating the sediment? How are they flushing down the sediment further downstream so that the rich alluvium can be used up for organic agriculture? So we have to think about these indigenous systems, and we have to put in place some of the traditional indigenous knowledge along with the modern knowledge systems. That is essential. Because see, when we created the Roorkee Engineering College way back, and the same engineering knowledge system actually, or I shouldn't say the knowledge system has developed, but the paradigm remains, right? But the same paradigm cannot govern today's river systems. So there has to be a paradigm change, a paradigm shift from what used to prevail at that point in time in our civil engineering, even in our civil structures. That has to evolve to incorporate more ecosystemic concerns, the broader societal concerns, the social and the ecological dynamics, and the economic ambitions. That has to match with that. So these are so today, in fact, the entire course of development, or what we call the paradigm of development or the discourse of development, has also evolved. At that point in time, when we were talking about these structures, we used to think of only one parameter as development, that is economic growth. Mm-hmm. Now, in fact, when we are talking about development, we are talking about the sustainable development goals, SDGs, we are talking about poverty alleviation, we are talking about environmental sustainability, we are talking about human aid, we are also talking about innovation, we are talking about industries, we are talking about climate change, one of the critical forces that have to be combated. So today's development paradigm is actually a reconciliation between what I call an irreconcilable trinity between economic growth or economy, ecology, and the society. That is, in one sense, equity, efficiency, and sustainability. And we have to reconcile between these three contending notions, right? You have to promote equity concerns like poverty and health, human capital. You have to have efficiency, in fact, so that your productivity is enhanced through better practices. You have to have sustainability concerns built into your developmental mechanism. So are dams going to promote or help us, in fact, in reconciling between this impossible trinity? If well designed, they can. Can we have better practices in agriculture which can help us, in fact, in enhancing productivity without compromising with the soil health? We are talking in terms of newer and newer forms of agriculture practices like regenerative agriculture, right? Which are enhancing productivity and not compromising on the soil health. On the other side, it's also helping in the process of better nutritional food. So we are addressing human capital, we are addressing productivity, we are addressing, in fact, sustainability. So these are the kinds of solutions that one need to think of.
Now, you've pointed out that in the given situation, it is very difficult to predict cloudbursts and rainfall, particularly in the Himalayan region. And you also pointed out the existence of dams and the lack of coordination between the center and the state, and between the state and other states, and between state the and the government of Bhutan, and between the country and the government of Bhutan. So in this situation, what needs to be done immediately to we won't be able to prevent it, at least to minimize the impact of these effects on the region?
Globally, in fact, people have been talking in terms of integrated river basin governance. And there are river basin organizations also, which are transboundary in nature, which have evolved as very effective institutions for governing these types of projects across river basins. Now, the problems are much more complex for the Himalayan river systems. It is, you talk about, most of these institutions have evolved, in fact, in the European Union largely. You also have one instance in the Himalayan river system where you have quite an effective institution working, that is on the Mekong Basin. So, the problem in this case, when you talk about the Ganges and the Brahmaputra system, as such as the Himalayan rivers which are passing through India, is that you also need, a congenial geopolitical scenario to evolve with an integrated approach. Given the hydropower or the geopolitics, especially in South Asia, it will be difficult to develop something like a transboundary river basin organization, but that would have been an ideal platform. Had there been cooperation, had there been some kind of an agreement between India, Bangladesh, China, Bhutan, Nepal all together, and you form a transboundary river basin organization for the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna system altogether. Now, even if that is not there, to a certain extent, some of these memorandum of understandings can be worked out, MOUs can be worked out between the nations across certain problematic in the sense are in risk-prone river basins where you have these problems of flash floods or say cloudbursts can happen, by way of which data can be shared. And in some way or the other, this is going to lead to development of an early warning system through better modeling. So if India, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, it exists in fact in the context of the Ganges water agreement, we share the flow data given the prices. But in certain contexts, we can even have a much more holistic agreement across these nations which are operating in fact in a transboundary framework for data sharing for the floods which we have with China. But in China, of course, I have criticized the existing agreement given the fact that the choice of the measuring stations are not proper. In fact, they are not helpful at all for giving us any kind of early warning. Here, in fact, there has to be a proper scientific basis of choosing those measuring stations from which the upstream nation can actually share the data with the downstream nation. In that case, if you create the proper early warning system, you can definitely have a much better way of managing the flood damages, A. B, a better knowledge which can in some way or the other can help us in understanding the course of the river. This is long term. While the agreement is a short term in the sense we can do that immediately within a year or so. But in the long term, let's understand the course of the river. Because let's face it, every Himalayan river changes its course. That is because of sedimentation. We used to have this entire notion of creating this what you call the flood zones, right? That this is essentially the flood plain zoning and whatever, and the floods are going to happen here. But those models are going to fail. Let's also use some traditional knowledge. Just at a point in time, all these, if you talk about traditional knowledge systems, they were aware on how the river actually changes its course over time. So the flooding, everybody knew that the flooding is going to, that the flood might happen in fact on the east bank, and tomorrow it might happen on the west bank or the north bank or the south bank, depending on that. So you have to create the space for the river. Don't come with the river space because of your unbridled ambition to grow, because of your unbridled force of urbanization. So you are coming in the way of the river. That is precisely why your properties are getting damaged. So if we have this kind of proper knowledge system by way of which we create those processes, uh, uh, where we are not going to encroach it into the space of the river, we will be in a better position to govern the floods. Third is that don't try out these man-made measures of embankments. In most cases, our very myopic local level knowledge has actually, by way of which these embankments have been created, have actually resulted in embankments getting breached over time. And that actually aggravated the flood damages. So here also, in fact, it is very important to understand the course of the river, to understand to what extent the river can expand its might, can expand its two hands. So the one should not come in the way of the river and consider that entire path as the river rights. So an integrated approach can only happen if we can have a better integrated social, ecosystemic, economic knowledge of the river system.
Such a pleasure talking to you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you so much for sparing the time.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.